Public radio program and podcast Reveal recently had an episode that was interesting, exquisite, infuriating. In Fallujah, we destroyed parts of ourselves. It's looking back, it's been 20 years, more than 20 years since the Battle of Fallujah, we should say, the battles of Fallujah. And it talks with a Marine company that encountered the toughest of losses. This was reported by the great Jim O'Grady, and co-reporting or involved in this was an outlet called the War Horse, which was founded and is run by Thomas Brennan. Thomas served as an infantryman in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he was there. And this was him and his unit recounting what happened. Thomas, Jim, welcome to The Gist.
Hi, Mike. Great to be here.
Me.
Let's just start by talking about what was, because Americans forget this was the biggest battle, the biggest urban battle, depending on how you judge things, since Vietnam, maybe that America was involved in since World War II. What was going on and what were the stakes, Thomas?
So what was going on for me personally was I was a young, at the time leading up to the battle, I was a private first class, brand new Marine, new to the infantry, and had been in Iraq for maybe 3-4 months at that point. And at that time, I didn't know about really anything. Like, we were just told to go, told to be there. We were told to expect heavy casualties. I wasn't paying attention to the news back home. We knew there was an election going on, but other than that, the geopolitical aspect of Fallujah and where it fit into the grand scheme of things was not anything that I was tracking, where I was as a young enlisted Marine on the ground.
Jim, if Thomas had been paying attention, it's probably good for his own self-preservation that he had. And what would he have seen or known or been privy to about Fallujah?
Well, we spoke to a former Marine who worked for years as a military lawyer, and he says that when Marines get together, they go through this litany of legendary, as in particularly brutal, blood-soaked battles, and they include Iwo Jima, Belleau Wood, Fallujah. It's just that high up there in the memory of Marines as a difficult place to be, where Thomas was with his unit in Alpha Company. Of course, this was in service of the Iraq War, which we dutifully note in the piece was founded on a lie. There were no weapons of mass destruction. The rationale for going in there was extremely thin. Thomas, in the piece, you referred to the clown car of George Bush and others who gave you your orders. And, when I spoke to your fellow unit members about this, like, do you regret the fallacious reasons for this war at all and that sent you into the Battle of Fallujah? I got answers like, well, what were we supposed to know? We were 19, 20 years old. We had orders. The orders came from the military and the president, but ultimately the orders come from you, the American people. And I think you said something similar. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that, listen, at the end of the day, we destroyed homes, we destroyed personal belongings. These were places that tens of thousands of people were, we did a lot of damage there. So I'm not trying to downplay any of the lasting, human impact of what we did inside of Fallujah. But yeah, there is a certain part of it where I feel like we were just following orders. And, I don't think it's wise to have, 19, 20, 21-year-olds guiding national security decisions. We should be able to trust our leaders that what we're being sent to do is sound in strategy and has sound judgment behind the decision that was made. And where I've grown increasingly frustrated is over the years hearing George Bush talk about the wars in a very flippant and dismissive way, and referring to himself as a war criminal. Like that's all. That's an indictment of the people you lead as well. So it's not just the failures in leadership that I now know happened. When I was the young, disposable 19-year-old American that raised their hand. But just like the compounding dismissiveness about those decisions over the years is really what I think is shameful and a very irresponsible use of our country's most valuable resource.
Wait, what do you mean referring to himself as a war criminal?
There was a speech that he gave at the George W. Bush Institute down in Texas where he was talking, I believe it was about Ukraine and Russia, about some ruthless war criminal that was just invading a country for no reason. And when he should have said Ukraine, he said Iraq.
I see.
Yeah. And then he just laughed it off. Those are the types of instances, or when you hear a leader talk about how they should have taken another step to think about what was going on, back in 2001, before we made such a gigantic decision of going to war. It's like those leaders are put in charge to show that restraint when young Americans' lives are going to be on the line for the decisions they're making.
I remember that. Corey, find that tape, and then we'll play that in in Thomas's first reference to it, so everyone understands. So here the Americans are. They're 10,000 strong, mostly Marines, maybe even exclusively Marines, and they're going for a second time after Blackwater contractors were ambushed there. They go into this city, this urban environment where thousands of combatants have, as we are now learning anew, the dangers of urban warfare, having ensconced themselves in homes, but also not. And there are citizens there. The upshot is almost 100 Americans would die. 1,000 to 2,000 Iraqis would die. Most of them combatants, they say. But tell me about your fellow serviceman, Bradley Faircloth, and a lot of the story and reveals about him.
Yeah. So first, I have to, even though I'm a Marine, I still got to acknowledge the Army and other branches that were that were in Fallujah. And from where I was on the ground in our squad, I can count the number of civilians that we saw on both of my hands. And it was only when we were at the government center, once we pushed across the line of departure there, I'm confident saying I only saw combatants with that were clearly armed.
Right. Unlike Gaza, there was a way out. And this was one of all, just for context, this was one of the greatest mass migrations fleeing of a city that the region of the world had known up until Syria. But go ahead.
Yeah. And there were a lot of troops. Like our unit went straight down the middle of the city. And a lot of the battalions that were to our right and to our left, they interacted with a lot more civilians that were fleeing toward the outskirts of the city. So I just can't speak to that aspect of it because it wasn't my experience. But no, Bradley Faircloth was, hands down, one of the top Marines in our squad, and just hell of a guy, and just always talked about his mom, always talked about his football team back home, and would argue with guys about being the guy to kick in the door. Like he felt like it was his job to lead, and we called him Brad the Barbarian. Sometimes guys, there was a point in the documentary where Meadows, the guy who was in the room with Brad when he was killed, talks about how he had to tell Brad, like, it's not fair that you're assuming far more risk than the rest of us.
Right. The guy who kicks in the door is the guy who's there immediately when anyone in the room is waiting for him. Yeah,
they call it the fatal funnel. When you walk in, it's because just a wall of lead can come your way when you walk in there. And that's what happened to him when he walked into a house right around Thanksgiving in 2004. and it's looking back on it, like we had a BBC videographer that was there with us, and very grateful they let us use the original footage of us inside Fallujah in the documentary, and just watching the cameraman in the stack behind Marines walking downstairs, like going into doors, like and doing. Yeah, like clearing the house. Like, I mean, the hair standing up on my arm, like just thinking about it right now. It's Brad leading that point is something I will always deeply respect, because my job was demolitions and rockets. Like I blew holes in a wall that other people ran through first, or I shot a rocket that other people, they ran through it first. So I had very few experiences of kicking in the door, and the few that I had were just it's terrifying.
There's no procedure for rotation. Because as you say, that's the deadliest position, and if one person is doing it over and over again, it seems unfair.
Well, so yes, you would rotate, but also like some people are bigger in stature than others, and
right.
We're more.
Bradley was 6'2" and strong, and said, "I want this."
And then on the flip side, like there are guys that were much smaller that were better at doing different jobs, or were the people having to, unfortunately, like go down into like little caves or things. So there were like everybody contributed something, and even if you kicked in the first door, you'd go into another room, and then somebody else would have to kick in another door. Like there was always another door. And it was never like it was really a competition. It was, Brad was efficient, and efficiency in action is what helps you take a house. It's what helps you take a city. Violent, efficient action. And he was efficient at kicking in doors.
So I will ask you this, Jim. So had you seen that documentary before, or were you assigned this, or somehow got this story, however a reporter gets the story, and then availed yourself of it?
That was serendipity. Assigned the story, was writing it up, and was just doing online research and came across it. And while watching it, realized, this is about these guys. And there's also tape of Bradley Faircloth himself describing what it's like to enter a house and the chaos when someone throws a grenade at you. So that's how I came across that.
Because the story you're assigned is a story of veterans who are struggling, and in some specific cases have been not treated well by the VA. That's the assignment. And then it just turns out that this specific group of veterans have this documentation and documentary about them.
That's right. The bulk of this reveal episode is about the aftermath of war, what Thomas and his unit went through, and how they have been coping, or in some cases not coping so well, for 20 years after Fallujah. And so to set that up, there has to be some glimpse into the threshing machine of combat, and just the grotesqueness of it, and the fierceness and the pressure, to just convey to the listener how this can stay with someone for the rest of their lives. This is so profound that it marks before and after in a person's life, and hence the importance of helping veterans deal with their not only real wounds, but psychological wounds and moral wounds.
There's a few of the veterans that you talked to, and who was the one who accepted therapy, got into therapy, and then became a therapist?
Yeah, that's a guy named Mike Ergo. He was a team leader in Alpha Company. He came back from war in very bad shape, flashbacks while walking down the stairs, and he'd have to like hunch onto the floor, drinking, doing drugs, to the point that he got suicidal, and he would drive on his motorcycle a million miles an hour down the freeway in California in sort of a semi-blackout state. And as he said, not committing suicide, but seriously tempting it, until his wife said, look, I love you, but I can't go down this road with you anymore. And that's what shocked him into cleaning himself up and eventually getting to therapy. Although to that point, as he says, I had no interest in therapy. I'm an infantryman. I'm a tough guy. I don't need therapy. It's not going to help me anyway. But it did help him to the point where he became one himself. And now he does that for a living, helping other veterans therapeutically.
There's this great moment in the reveal episode where he tells you this and you say, that's a ridiculously inspiring story. And then the tape you get back is him saying, which I thought it still says that the guy is still a member of the military. He still has a sort of military affect to him that the most he could give you after saying that was,
Well, you know what I took from that? He was being polite to me. I think what was behind the was, well, you're a supercilious civilian and you see this in terms of like a movie. But dude, it's not a movie. There was a long road to get to the good resolution of that story.
Thomas, how in touch were you with, I'm sure it's different levels for different guys, but how in touch were you and the other members of the unit, and how aware were you of what everyone was going through in the years, decades afterwards?
I think it's fair to say that the majority of us, so it ebbed and flowed over time. When we first came back, for the first few years, we stayed in touch, over social and calls, and people would come back and visit the base and things like that. And then you kind of got to settle into life, and you have to face the transition, and you drift apart a little bit. You still talk every once in a while. But then I think, part of it is once you start healing a little and processing it more, at least for me, like, and some of the guys I can speak to, like, it hurts to revisit it. So you just, like, part of the cycle, it's the avoidance. Like, you avoid the people that you were closest with and the people that you, in my opinion, should be connecting with the most, because they make you feel less crazy. They make you feel less alone. And then I think it was really probably around like the 15-year mark, we kind of really started to connect a little bit more than we were. And yeah, that kind of, it was this natural progression where it made me a little bit more able to revisit the story. And like, I didn't want to tell it for the 20th anniversary. I didn't think I was ready to tell it for the 20th anniversary. And for me, the reason why I wanted to tell the story and why I did for the 20th was when Gaza kicked off and they were saying, send in the Marines that have experience in Fallujah. They can teach the Israelis how to make this be a success. For me, as somebody at that point, that would have been like 18, almost 19 years removed from it, like success. Like I wouldn't wish the psychological shit that we've been through on anybody in this world. Like, in my mind, I thought, like, I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of ironic. Like, the Israelis were telling us about mental health when our wars were kicking off, and now they're dooming their service members to, a lifetime of moral injury like we're experiencing. Hey, you guys have matching
this is
hairstyles.
ridiculous. I got to get rid of this guy. He's ruining too many moments.
So yeah, like for me, it was just like seeing. it was hard. It's hard enough, like people being like, "Oh, Fallujah," like, "Oh, that was crazy," that was intense.
Right.
Like it kind of it. I don't know. It is what it is to me. Like it's my military experience. But then to have somebody be like, "Oh, we're going to point to this as a success," when it's like we leveled that city, like we made a majority of it inhabitable for people when they came back. Like, and now like kids are sick and families are sick, and like, yes, they're doing better.
Yeah.
But like, at what cost? And how is that success?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, if there was some horrific school shooting, if someone said, let's send the kids who experienced Columbine. It's like, well, why? The same re-traumatized people? I understand as a fighting unit, mission accomplished, but you're pointing to everything other than a fighting unit.
I mean, if your mission is to go in and like the mission of the Marine Corps Rifle Squad is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy, like, and to do it as fiercely and efficiently and as fast as possible. Like, if that's your mission and you want everything destroyed in between that, like, send in the Marines and have the Marines advise people on how to do it. Like, but if that's not truly your desired end state, like, you might want to get a different type of advisor.
Yeah. Tell me about, there's another major character or person to you, Thomas, friend, Ronaldo Aponte. What was his role in the unit?
In my opinion, Doc Aponte and Doc Frazier had the two most difficult jobs in our entire platoon by serving as our two Navy corpsmen. This isn't me belittling them. Like they were both effectively paramedics on the battlefield, expected to be trauma surgeons.
Right.
And that's a lot to put on the shoulders of an 18, 19, 25-year-old kid, the young adult. So Doc actually joined the Navy because he didn't want anything to do with combat. And then I believe it was right after 9/11, he got told he was going to Corps school and he was going to go become a corpsman. And then he got assigned to the Marines, and that's where we met him. But he was always quiet, reserved. But the one thing that he had our trust. Marines will say it, and we actually mean it. Like, we run through that fatal funnel into the door. We storm the machine gun. We put our lives at risk because we know that 19-year-old is back there with minimal medical supplies, and willing to do whatever the hell it takes to save us if something happens to us. And that they're not always able to save us. And Doc wasn't able to save Faircloth. And it wasn't because he didn't try. He tried everything he possibly could. It was because Faircloth was so badly injured that there was nothing. I don't think we could have had a full-blown trauma unit next door. And I don't think that Faircloth would have made it because of the number of bullets that his body took.
Yeah.
But Doc still bears the weight of that. He was that trauma surgeon, that should have been able to save him. It was he had one job. It was his job. And he, quote unquote, failed his job in his eyes. And that's something that even a Marine can't relate to a corpsman about, because it's the roles are so different, and
there's the moment in the documentary and in your piece on Reveal where he talks about trying to get a pulse for Faircloth, and he fails, and he realizes it's because his fingers had gone deeply into his wrist. He had no wrist. There was no pulse to get. So what were you trying to do by telling his story, or how does his story play out, Jim?
Well, in some ways, he's the counterpoint to Mike Ergo, who we were discussing earlier, who found his way toward therapy and changed his life fully. Ronaldo has taken a longer road than that. we also spoke to a therapeutic nurse practitioner who's in the military for 20 years. And she said, guilt, like Ronaldo has, survivor's guilt, is not rational. You can say to the person all you want, you're not responsible. You couldn't have done more. And they just don't feel that way. And that's the case with Ronaldo. And so as a way of coping, when he got back from Iraq and while he was in Camp Lejeune, he took substances. He tested positive for cocaine. And then the trial, figuratively speaking, and then later literally, of the military justice system kicked in for him. And that did not help his state of mind or his healing process. In many ways, it worsened it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, was it a sergeant who publicly shamed him?
Yeah, this seems to have been a turning point moment for him. So, okay, you fail a drug test for cocaine. This is not that unusual in the military, but it is a rule that you've broken and has to be dealt with. The military code of conduct says this cannot go unpunished. So that procedure kicked off. But in the meantime, his commanding officer decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to muster the entire company in front of the barracks. I'm going to pull out a Ponte and the other guys who failed their drug tests. I'm going to stand them in front of their brothers and their colleagues, and I'm going to humiliate them by telling them everyone what happened and calling them bad Marines. And that, you can imagine that's sort of with him to this day. Because despite the fact that he broke the rules, being a Marine and his fellow Marines really means something to him. And as a matter of fact, so a lot of this piece is about Thomas and Ronaldo and Mike Ergo and the others, how they still get together every so often. And so a lot of the tape in the piece comes from a reunion they held in Washington, D.C. last summer, just to be with each other and to talk to each other, knowing that these are the only people who really understand what I went through. And I'll just add that an important part of this group is Bradley Faircloth's mother, Lean Faircloth, from Mobile, Alabama, who lost her son, and over the years has developed this deep connection to this unit, Thomas included, Ronaldo included, Mike Ergo, and others. And they love each other. That's all there is to it. That's what I saw. And she told me that when they first started having these reunions soon after the war, everyone clammed up. No one wanted to talk about what they went through. And now, 20 years later, they can talk about it. And all I'll say is, I've reported a lot of stories and done a lot of interviews, but the tape that they gave at this reunion was some of the most vulnerable and yet self-insightful things I have ever heard.
Mm-hmm. One interesting aspect of the story to me was you reporting out what the military's reaction is to the specific substance abuse that was engaged in, because many people said if it was alcohol or even marijuana, that would be one thing. Cocaine is in a whole different category to the military because I guess they think it's less understandable that you would be doing this in a normal course of action and just got out of control. Someone describes it as a party drug. Do you, either Jim, you or Thomas can take this. Do you think that reflects a rational understanding of why someone might be, as they say, self-medicating with cocaine?
I think so I've heard cocaine's a party drug. I've experimented with drugs over my life. Like, cocaine's never been my thing. It wouldn't be my thing. But where I can understand why a lot of the guys were doing coke when they came back was, think about the speed and intensity to which we had just experienced Fallujah. I could see getting close to, like, when you get the adrenaline rush, or you got it feels good. Like you'll never get shot at again like that. Like I'll never have the rush of blowing a hole in the wall, like standing 5 feet away from it. But like, I don't know, like I can see how cocaine would have been therapeutic in that moment for somebody who'd been through something like that. With that being said, it is clearly against military protocol. But to your point about alcohol, we were all just trashed all the time when we came back. I mean, like the leadership had kegs and fifths of liquor, like waiting on us when the buses arrived. I mean, people got in trouble for getting so shit-faced drunk. They were throwing Molotov cocktails off the roof of or off third deck of the barracks, and like launching fridges off. I mean, like things got nuts with the alcohol at the barracks. And yes, there's protocols for if you have an alcohol dependence issue, if you have a DUI or have some kind of an alcohol related incident. But by and large, like being a drunk in the military is, if you can PT in the morning and do your job during the day, like it's not something I've seen or that I hear people are too concerned with.
Yeah. And as the documentary or as the report notes, a lot of these rules haven't been rewritten to reflect the realities of what you went through. So they were written for a time when the military wasn't involved in active shooting wars.
Well, so the policy, I mean, we can have a conversation about the policy, but Jim's point earlier about like they called him a bad Marine. Yeah. That part there, like, yes, the policy's flawed. I think that there needs to be more accommodations made for traumatized people, especially when it's, in the line of duty, like combat. What they did to those Marines and corpsmen by pulling them out and publicly shaming them, it wasn't just calling them bad Marines. I mean, they told them that they negated their service, that they made their service not honorable, that they should be ashamed of themselves and their service. Their families were gonna, not look at them as having had, they went on and on and on and just drilled it on, like, you're not going to have access to your education benefits. You're not going to have health care because of this. If you're out in the formation right now and you make this decision, your life is going to be over just like these shitbags. Mm. And like the language was a lot worse than that. I can promise you that. But it was like they just belittled and degraded and just emotionally destroyed these people in front of their peers, their colleagues, their best friends. I firmly believe one of my friends from my platoon, I do not think I think it was an intentional drug overdose. I think he killed himself after that one. I think there's a few others.
What was the time frame? How long afterwards?
A month or two.
Really?
But yeah, he was one of the people that were using the heavier drugs. I mean, like, it could have been a legitimate overdose. However, I knew him more than I knew other people. And I'm confident saying it contributed, if he overdosed because he was using more drugs after that, I think how they treated him contributed to that issue. Just like I think after people got pulled out and told their careers were over and this, and those same people just stopped. Why do they need to stop doing drugs now? Their life is over. And then they just got another drug charge and another drug charge and another drug charge. And then it was another embarrassment in front of the platoon, another embarrassment in front of the platoon, until they eventually weeded all these people out.
So is your assessment that the military, the Marines, they are a very effective fighting force, but everything afterwards they haven't really grappled with. Do you think that they're getting any better? I know there was a handoff once you leave the service to the VA. Is it that the VA isn't taken as seriously or as well staffed or gets as much respect as the actual Marine Corps does? What's your assessment?
So I believe that the Marine Corps as a whole has made tremendous improvements when it comes to mental health of the mental health of the force. The most notable, I think it was 2 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago. There was a video that was, I believe it was right around the Afghan withdrawal. Mm-hmm. So you might be able to find the audio of it, but it was the Commandant and the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, not just speaking to the Marine Corps, but speaking to Marine Corps veterans more broadly about the importance of mental health and being proud of your service. And, I think it spoke to the moment with the Afghan withdrawal and how that was, let's just say, a debacle. But I think it demonstrates just leaders weren't saying that in 2004, 2005 when we came home. Like now they are, right? So like, even if it's just institutional messaging, like we've moved forward. But having had many conversations with people in the ranks, like there's a lot of room left for improvement in the Marine Corps and the military more broadly. However, I think that there has been a tremendous amount of proactivity on the Marine Corps' part to make it to make sure the force experiences less of a stigma toward that mental health care and is able to pursue it easier. With that being said, I think that officers in the Marine Corps still have much more of an uphill battle to getting mental health care than enlisted Marines. And what I mean by that is there are like choice assignments where there's tracks that you follow to get from point A to point B in a career, and the most promising people go here or only eligible for those places. If you stop to go get mental health and you need 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, like you may still be deployable, you may go to another unit, but you may not get that choice assignment. And then if you're on track and you're hoping to get a star or whatever your career goals are, that may be a deterrent for you to going and getting help, and I believe that it should be easiest for the officers to go get help because they're the ones leading hundreds. If it's a platoon, 30, 40, 50, right? Like if it's a battalion, like you're leading over 1,000 people, you need to be mentally fit. You need to be mentally sharp. You need to have your shit together because that's 1,000 lives on the line that are all going to follow your orders when you tell them to do something. And if you make the wrong decision because you have a chronic mental health issue, like that's a bad day for a lot of people on the ground. Yeah.
And Jim, I know that you are more of an outsider than Thomas is, but you report on military issues frequently. What about the ongoing needs of this unit jumped out at you?
So Ronaldo was court-martialed, and between an honorable discharge and a dishonorable discharge, there are a couple of other statuses, and he left the Marine. He basically accepted a plea bargain that allowed him to leave the Marines with a less than honorable discharge. Now that comes with a significant cut to benefits, to money and benefits, medical benefits especially. So this has been, a challenge for him in the last 20 years as a consequence of the discipline that he doesn't dispute that he deserved. But lately, the VA has been coming to the notion that maybe trauma from combat could at least be introduced into the court-martial process, could at least be retroactively considered when someone applies for an upgrade to their discharge, as Ronaldo has done. There's another step above less than honorable, and if he were to be promoted to that step, he would then be qualified for medical benefits. And this is important to him and to many other veterans. You know, he might not avail himself of the mental health services, but many other veterans would. So this is the halting progress that is being made by the Veterans Administration. And I don't know if you want me to bring this up now, but it does connect to the threatened budget cuts that the Veterans Administration could be suffering as soon as the fall, and whether that will slow down the process of reevaluating the status of veterans and their access to mental health services. Was that too
Thomas,
winding? Sorry.
No, that's good. That's the answer that's an answer
Okay.
that is great and acceptable. And Thomas, I know that you're involved in not just in Warhorse and this particular project, but I saw you on the Daily Show and you've been advocating for benefits and just a recalibration of how our government prioritizes veterans. What are, if you have one or two asks of either the government or the rest of us, civilian society, what would they be?
Wow. Of the government. Got to boil it down to one thing to ask Uncle Sam. Though. That's a challenge.
It could be a big theme, right? Not a line item.
Well, so the first thing that comes to mind, and maybe it's because you brought up the Daily Show, but Jon Stewart he's suggested it a handful of times over the years, making sure that if we go to war, there's some budget that's funded through the War Fund for veterans care on the back end. I think that had that been something that was done after 9/11, would we be still having budgetary, staffing cut conversations now, 24, 25 years later? I don't know. But that was the first thing that came to mind for me. And then as far as for the American public, over the last 10 years, I've really had an opportunity to get to know a lot more civilians than I did while I was in the military. And a common thread that I tend to hear is they don't know how to start the conversation with a veteran. They don't know how to ask about the service. They don't know how to ask about where they've been and what they've done. And what I have recommended to people over the years is ask them what their favorite memory is. What's your favorite memory from the time that you were in the Marine Corps, or the Army, or the Navy, or whatever it is? Because that immediately makes them focus on something positive. If you ask me, I would tell you that it is, sitting by the fire, eating dinner with my guys in Afghanistan. That is my favorite memory from, that deployment. And arguably one of my favorite memories from service. I was TJ in that moment. I wasn't Sergeant Brennan. Roche was Jim and Huber was Serge. And we let our walls down. And I think it really showed the camaraderie and the love that we have for one another. And if, I think I've been asked as a veteran many times, would you do it all over again? And it's hard to wish Fallujah upon yourself. But I would, I don't know if I'd want that trauma again, but I would do it all over again because I understand, I was surrounded by selfless people who were committed to being good leaders and demonstrating good leadership traits and qualities. And, while it was a flawed premise for war, we're willing to meet the moment when they were told to do something difficult. And that's a great foundation to build your life on. Having witnessed good leadership, and so I don't know. I feel like I rambled a little bit there.
No, I got it. Jim O'Grady was the reporter and producer for the reveal episode in Fallujah. We destroyed part of ourselves. One of the people in that episode, and joining me was Thomas Brennan. He served in the Battle of Fallujah. He's now an author and founder of The War Horse. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.